use. So one of the things we're trying to find, and I think it's gotten much better since Revit 2019, has found some solutions. But I would advise either for older projects, using an earlier version of Revit might be beneficial to, in order of preference, I guess. Ideally, we might use either a plan view with view range adjusted, so we can see that ceiling, but use a ceiling that has grid lines that show all the way through if it doesn't. Question.
Ultimately, Soldier stepped in the Texas Rangers Hall of Fame. But once his playing days were over, trouble soon followed. He was fired as pitching coach of the Nationals due to persistent practical jokes, and while serving as pitching coach of the Mariners, police were called to his home for suicide. Yesterday, New Jersey Gates, head of his sports, to put together a coaching staff. It looks like he's ready to make his first move.
To say the question again for in case it's audible on the meeting. Is there a workaround or something within program to help those components show through in a specific fashion? A little bit, but where you start to lose the benefit of the plan, where in Revit, unless you've locked your 3D view, you can't put on annotations properly, and it'd be difficult to have the styles we might need. I think it would require a bit more manipulation. It's possible. I haven't tested it fully. That would be an interesting question. For lighting, it actually works pretty well. I would say for lighting and for sprinkler, we can use the RCPs as intended because we don't have that hidden line issue. So we can use the RCPs as planned. But for conduit ductwork, because that hidden line concern, we have more manipulation involved. So either when I can't get this ceiling to work within that view range and picked properly, as a last resort or further down the line, you can either do a CAD background to display it, or at very last to have one view the architectural background and then to have one with the system. There is a through the Revit links aspect of the visibility, you can do some stuff with bringing the architectural background that's supposed to match, but it's still a bit of the same issue. So that hasn't been perfect, and those are some ways around. Right. Linked by view. I do have some Revit files prepared, which we can open up later for some workshopping, but go through the full program. The various tools at our disposal tend to have a little bit of limits that a view crop sometimes needs supplement to make it look proper. So if we just had the view crop be our break line, then it's not going to have the symbol that has that wavy line accent to show that this is where the view stops. So we need to at least include that. A masking region I've seen doesn't obscure wires, which is very fascinating. So, Andre, I think see if that comes back. There it is. Well, the audio sorts. I'll keep talking as Andre pulls the visual back up. Oh, that's good. Or everyone group around the laptop. That'd be interesting. So for break lines, the masking region doesn't always obscure everything we want, and it can sometimes be a little odd, but it does have the benefit of we can define the area to any custom shape or size we want. I've usually found I'll use a masking region for an individual room and kind of blot out the model category components and use the view crop as the external boundary of the view, and then use a detail line and a symbol to denote this is where it stops, and have the benefit of the Revit crop stopping all model stuff. Oh, the visual fact. And to have the annotation crop make sure that we're not seeing too far. And as a very last resort, we can hide in view, but as I always recommend all of my team members, that's always the last resort because no one will know that you've hidden view unless they have the foresight to think of doing the revealed hidden command. Otherwise, people are going to be hunting for it, thinking it's somewhere in the settings and not know it's just manually done. And again, if you have a host of symbols, I actually lucked out when creating this that I had a beautiful view. It's a little small that I do have over here. The double line pipe break symbol I created, my view break line, and then single pipe break line, all grouped nicely together. Next up is phasing. So a difficulty that is encountered within Revit phasing tools, which are marvelous and very helpful, but we have an unfortunate instance where when we set MEP systems that have continuity, like pipes, ducts, and conduits, once we set them to demolished, they all break apart. They become disconnected and lose their system. So it's a nice thing to avoid where we can, and the workaround I've found for this is to create a new parameter that's a custom phase parameter that then will equip you to set things to being demolished without being demolished in Revit. So we can keep that connection, but we can use our filters to parse out what's what. So as we can see up here, I have in this view everything that's gray is existing, new is green, and red is demolished. And the other nice thing with this is if I have complicated phasing, I had a project that had 8 different phases at one point, and so being able to control if I needed to have documents that had some combination of, okay, things in phase A happening at the same time as phase C, but not the same time as B, it would be impossible to do with Revit phases because that's purely linear. And once you go past a phase, you can't decipher what's back since it only has a view previous and not a view selected aspects of previous. So having complex phasing is beneficial for times where you might need to show a certain combination, but it takes a lot more filters in your views to make sure it's displaying properly and a lot more maintenance. So you want to use that cautiously, but again, as with everything in life, there's a little bit of a case-by-case case basis based on your project. And I think last of these little examples, printing order is an interesting thing in Revit because it does it purely alphabetically out of the box, which can be a little frustrating. So either print by set and then compile them all together in Bluebeam or Adobe Acrobat, whatever you might have. If it rotates as Revit likes to do for some reason when you go to print, know that you can just rotate it in your PDF software to get it back in line rather than trying to understand why Revit will do that randomly, even when landscape is always chosen. That, and I've also heard that there's a beautiful Bluebeam plugin that lets you set the order in which things print into your PDF. I haven't gotten to test it out yet myself, but I'm looking forward to doing that. All right, next topic we're going to cover is model integrity versus design and some of the things that we might need to cope with. So knowing when we need to make certain sacrifices for the betterment of design and when they have to be done. So I've often found that during schematic design is the most likely time for our team where, for those who are not fully comfortable in Revit, it's going to be a little harder to get their thoughts down into 3D if they haven't done it before. Again, that's always most preferable. We want people working within software as early as they can because it gives us a jump start. But I would say schematic design is the time with the most leeway. It's before things are too set. Things might change considerably anyway going into design development. So I would say schematic design is the time you might consider having somebody do designing in CAD itself. And then during design development, you should really make sure the whole team has brought their things back into Revit. We can also use more generic families in place of manufacturer models where available. A good manufacturer model is king. If we can have all the connections available to us, if we can have that view visibility and have gorgeous 3D views, it's wonderful. But sometimes when we're trying to just get our intent shown, having a simplified model is adequate. So rather than having a fully detailed chiller, I might use my generic rectangle mechanical equipment family. And it might be that 80% of the time that's going to be fine the whole way through, and we can always add it back in later. So that's something else where we might see that trade-off. Same thing with that phasing of knowing when we want to do that full work through to make it as strong as possible when we say it's okay, and also the full connections. And so to illustrate some of those, so for level of connectivity, based on what you see here, this actually looks completely connected, and we brought it to everything. And truth be told, there's some, it's not actually fully connected to the fixture, but none might be the widest. And that also might bring it a little further than necessary, that it's knowing for your design what is necessary. If you're going to be doing analysis and using some of those design tools, that's when you truly need full connection, because otherwise you're not going to get your full system. Flows won't compute properly. You're not going to be able to do that systems inspector to make sure it's working properly. And you need to also know what your LOD requirements are. I haven't heard that as much for design, but I know for construction, where LOD is extremely important, you want to make sure you're satisfying what's part of the contract. And also it depends on what you want to do with your visualization. That if you want to be able to create a 3D section like this one, you need to bring it at least close to its installation point to have it represent properly. But if it's purely going to be used for creating a 2D drawing, you might have the luxury to say you can bring the pipe in plan over it and then terminate it there and have it look right in plan view, when in 3D it might not be fully connected. I would say that the times to do that would be if the design is fully vetted out, that there's full confidence in what the engineer has gone through and has planned out, that you don't need to do that in Revit. And if you know that your documentation needs to be out the door and it might not be required to do the full 3D, but as a Revit man myself, I would say if you have the time, just for the practice and the ability alone, it's a great thing to do. I'm going to go through a couple little case studies for real projects that we've done and some workarounds we had to do. One I didn't have the time to rustle up a perfect image for is what I was just discussing, that pipe position in the model. So pipes are particularly difficult because of how often they're done diagrammatically. That because often in our plan, it's small enough and to try and show it clearly of if one is stacked over another, we'll use in our typical documentation convention, we'll just move it out to the side when that's not quite the 3D reality of it. And again, it's gauging what's proper for your project. I would say for projects where there's going to be a need for sections anyway, that's probably a time where it's more prudent to follow the true reality model and have that, then have extra supplements of either more sections or giving a Navisworks file to the client to help share with them what's going on. And for smaller scale ones where they probably won't get to that level of detail, where it's okay to place Revit pipes, the actual families, as they are stronger than just making lines, but in a more diagrammatic fashion where they might have some clashes to them, but it won't, you know, if it's not being coordinated for your job, then that may be acceptable. So I do have some examples for the other case studies. So one thing we've done is for tags that, again, at the end of the day, and what I always recommend to my team is that we want to always use things in order of preference in Revit. We want to use the most robust option at our disposal, because otherwise we're crippling ourselves. We're not using the full ability that Revit has to offer and why we're using the program. So most of all, we want to use a full tag that has the proper intelligence, that's going to look to, say, this example here, and find what the identity of the home run is, and actually know the panel it's going back to. Well, for this particular project, we didn't have that developed in time, and our wiring, while this was all true wiring, the home run didn't quite know the identity of what was hooking back to. And because of our time frame and our budget, what we ended up doing is we took the simple route out. We just had some text in there, and that worked for this one. If the project had some more time and was going to continue, we would go back and we would try and give it the full operability. But in order of preference, we want to do the full tag as available, to use a tag with a prefix or suffix, as in to use a pipe size tag that has the suffix of up for a riser, because we might not have the time to truly create a perfect riser tag, or to just have some text where we say, you know what, this is a single usage, it's not going to be repeated, and it's easier to update, and it's not as likely to change drastically. If we know that our pipe size is going to change 10 times a day, and we're not using a tag, there's going to be a problem eventually. If it's something where it's going to call out to more of a note of something that will be more steady, then that's a time that text will be more sufferable. Same thing with details. In order of preference, we want to have a perfect drafting view in an external library that we can then import into our projects, put it right on our details page, and it will be able to know what it is and be able to have the proper view title shown. Well, say we have a new detail we want to use that's in a different Revit project or in CAD or not even created yet. What we might have to do in diminishing order is to have a Revit drafting view newly created that's not in that library, but is more of a one-off. We might need to convert something from CAD where we bring it in, we explode it, and then we take all the components and make them proper for Revit, making sure all the lines are in the proper line style.
This is a hard pet peeve. If you ever import AutoCAD, you have all your AutoCAD line styles in your Revit file, and you cannot get rid of them. So if you ever do import AutoCAD, do it into a separate file. Do your converting there, and then copy paste the new Revit content into your actual working file. Anything else you'll regret that.
That's a very good point. No worries. You're absolutely right. If it doesn't purge, yep. Ideally, purge catches everything, but yeah, there's some things that it does not go kindly for, and you end up getting 5 billion different text styles and 5 billion different line styles. So if you're, I have seen that because our CAD layers match our Revit line styles, it actually comes in pretty neatly then, but you need to make sure that you have good integration between both tools if both are being used. But yes, absolutely, any import.
By the time you do a clean conversion of AutoCAD, you import the cleanup, you assign all the right line weights and all of that. You're already done drafting the, what is it on that thing? 4 dotted lines, 5 dotted lines. You've got those drawn straight up, brand new, and Revit quicker than the conversion routine. If you want to do the conversion right. If you don't do it right, you'll regret it.
Yeah, conversion takes a while. I do want the test for within my group to figure out if it's better exporting from Revit to CAD for detailed libraries, which I think can work, but then the problem is, and I'll get into this a bit more later as well, bringing from CAD to Revit has the issue of it brings a lot of extra gunk with it. And it doesn't always keep the leaders attached to the text, and those need to be recreated. And there's a certain minimum size line that Revit needs to deal with. So there's a lot of issues there. But on the way back from Revit to CAD, we lose annotative text. So I think there's integration issues back and forth there still. But ideally, we're using Revit as much as we can because it does have great strengths to it. But and kind of the crux of what I'm discussing today, it's knowing when your company is willing to, when it has the time and budget to do the project as fully equipped as possible, and when it's more limited, we need to say, you know what, we need to bang this out quick, and we have to do these certain sacrifices. But again, as an idealist, I do want to say that we want to do everything as properly, but it's trying to weigh that as best we can. It's hard to share all possible within the span of tonight. One thing towards family detail, again, comes down to how complex you wish to have. So this was for a CHP plant that we're working on, where we started with some very simplified versions of the boilers and a hot water tank. And then we ended up saying, oh, you know what, we think the client's going to really want to see how it's all connecting. And then I actually used the cut sheets to make the true perfectly dimensioned boiler and that tank. So it comes down to what you need, because if you're only using it from a plan perspective, and your family might need a lower level of detail anyway, and you're the one who's going to have to make that family, you can use judgment well there. Complex fitting, same thing. This one might be slightly illegal, but I was trying to draft it up quick. For the plan view itself, there's some times where the Revit Imperial Library might not have everything you're looking for. And there might be a couple instances where you can fake it using some of the fittings at your disposal. And again, that can only be done if you know you're not going for analysis and are willing to ditch the full connectivity. But the library is pretty good. Most of what you need is in there. But where you need to absolutely do it, you can bring things together and make it look pretty close to it. Oh, I have the whole thing there. Oops. One more thing is that we can extend the use of certain model categories for things that will have a bit more vertical play to them, or we want to just keep the connection of the run. So these were instances where, for simplicity or making sure it stayed hosted to the rest of the run, I actually modified a pipe fitting or accessory to make a pipe sleeve that would stay in line, and modified a duct union to make a curb. So again, can be done. It's helpful for the visual and keep things connected and moving together. And looks pretty nice. So next up, we've got integration with other products. I think this is the last slide of mine. And mixing platforms, in my general opinion and what I've seen so far, usually doesn't work so smoothly. There's a lot to maintain. You've got twice as many standards to enforce. You've got twice as many files to have to upkeep. But when it's necessary, it can work out. Keep your files organized, know where things are going in. As I was saying before, there are losses or sacrifices that will be made when you bring one program to another to be on the lookout for. And managing scales can be a big issue, but using a DWG as a background works well enough. And again, that's only when you don't have a full 3D project. I've had an instance where the project started in 3D, it was going to go that route, and then the architect changed their mind, and that's okay. But since we had already started our design and we were a good portion of the way in, we ended up using their general starting 3D model as a framework, and then we use the DWG background as the official submission. And that took some view template settings to make sure that in our work views, we were able to see some more of the 3D to help give us a sense of what we were designing into. And then for our documentation view templates, to have the DWG show through. So here's an example for a CHP project where we had a long, full AutoCAD background for usage. But since it was boilers, we knew we wanted to have things in 3D because it was going to be very complicated. So we ended up doing some modeling of architectural ourselves that you can see. And then the background we had loaded, again, I always advocate, if you're loading in a CAD file, load it per view only. If you're doing a usual 3D model, because otherwise it's going to show up everywhere. The only time I've ever seen an exception to this is this project where we said, you know what, if this needs to show in every view, because it's effectively simulating the architectural model, that was the one time I loaded to the 3D space itself onto a proper work set and with due caution. But otherwise, always load your CADs to view only, lest they show up everywhere or unexpectedly. And linking is way better. And with that, are there any questions? I do have Revit models with me that we can showcase or more deeply investigate some of the topics I've explored, or any best practices that you've had in your office or troubles you've experienced. Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. So yes, absolutely. So I'm going to show a little bit towards my view creation practice. So let me open up. Let's grab. So this here is a healthcare project that I had used. So it's simplified a bit, and let's take a look. So what we have, let me move my GoToMeeting bar so I can see what I'm doing. So traditionally speaking, what we face when we make views is we come to our view tab, we come to plan views, and Revit does a pretty good job with views themselves. That what I do recommend is that as long as you've got a couple different types, so I actually have a full list here. So is there a particular trait you like to use for my example? I'll do mechanical then. I happen to enjoy mechanical. So I can go to this type, and I have it tethered automatically to my view template for HVAC. So I have a pretty extensive list of view templates if I go to it. And again, I strongly recommend using numbers and prefixes to help keep them all organized, since Revit does it more alphabetically. So help keep them in an easy to find fashion. But I've got one for basically every single trade and discipline and subdiscipline out there. And so I have, when I make this view, it will automatically apply this view template as default. So it will have it directly attached. So in case that was hidden away, and if it's new to some people, which also continue because I don't want to assume anything. So that would be the most traditional way of saying we're going to create a view. I will have the option of saying I don't want to create duplicates. That will help me know I've created a unique view to each level for that particular view template. So let me do some of that now. Do that. I'll hit OK. That will go to create some there. I forgot that's going to take some time. All right. And that will put the views in the location based on the template itself. And then the next thing that would usually be done is I have several view templates that require a second view template applied. So I'll have a view template that, say, has filter unchecked, because I want to apply that from a separate one in case I want to manipulate, oh, well, for this one, I want my color scheme based on work set instead of by system. Or I want to do this view range. So there's sometimes I've strategically left things out of the view template to be able to have more of a stacking procedure. So what I'll often do, let me jump to it there. So those have now gone to documentation, mechanical, and if I scroll this out here, you know what? They might have gone to question marks. Woo. Yep, you're there. So here's all those that I just created. Oh, apparently did not keep it as the, that's a shame. For some reason it did not save the full location. So let me come back over here. Here we go, plan. So now I'm assigning it the proper view template. Now it's going to snap right from here to, oh, see, I took that off because I made some examples. That's what happened. So I actually turned these off. I've forgotten. But that would normally move them to where we want. And for sheet creation, what would traditionally be done is we need to do the same thing of clicking on sheet, and for the most part, from Revit out of the box, it's one at a time, where you have to keep repeating that over and over. So I'll end up spamming my hotkey for it, and I'll hit enter about a dozen times, and then rename and renumber them all. So some procedure that I found that I've ended up using is in-house. LiRo has some API experts, and so they were able to. Oh, it might not be active here. Let me jump to. So I'm going to jump back to Revit 17 for the moment, since I know the plugin's working here. And I'm going to come to my tools, and they created this lovely view creator file, so I can create views directly from based on a certain level. I could tell it, okay, use this building first floor, define a certain scope box to it, and say, okay, I want the all the steam rooms, and set a specific trade to it. So I can create my views through here. I do think that the Revit default tool works pretty well, so I haven't always used this one. But I'd say for creating sheets, because that's a bit more individual in nature, that's where this really is stellar. So I can just search for, give me mechanical. It's going to search for anything that has the word mechanical in it. I can now grab all of these, tell it which title block I want. So let's say I'll grab this one here. It will have a bit more trouble with the sheet name and number, since that's a little harder to have individual. I think for right now, the sheet number is not fully activated at the moment, but it will take the view name and bring it to the sheet name. I can give it a certain placement. Let's do one for the moment. Let's do this. Let's do name plus, let's do rug. And we'll create this sheet. Oh, it's already there. Should have known. Oh, let me do one that I know isn't in there. Let's do that. Let's do that. And let's say we'll align it this way. I'll create that sheet. So this is great for quickly generating them all. But then for bulk renaming, having a separate plugin, again, either third party or in-house or whatever's available to you, that brings it to Excel. Way easier to rename and renumber things in Excel than in Revit. Because again, Revit, even using a schedule, which is more effective than doing it line by line in the project browser, it will take time to reload and refresh it each time. Here we go, that's complete. Looking for next one. So let's go down here to the question marks. And here it is. So this is the sheet we just created. And we should see how that's scaled actually. And oh, it was a little big for the sheet, as it turned out. But it tried its best, as you can actually see. The overall center of this is trying to be placed relative to the center of that. So unfortunately, this view wasn't well suited for this example, but it's that same batch, that batch setting. And then I can do Excel import export. And this does the same thing where any parameter from Revit can be sent to Excel and then brought back in again. And I think Imagine has a tool for that, which is very nice. And if you want, you can talk to me after. I can discuss more options for that.
Doing a lot of batch creation, batch sheet creation, batch view creation are both pretty frequently discussed on the Dynamo group. A lot of samples of that.
Very good point. Dynamo is an excellent tool. It's a beautiful visual programming software that has much easier to, very easy to pick up So definitely check out the forums. That's a great comment. Yes. Sure. So let me jump to that. So I'm going to pop back to the healthcare project, and I have put that guy over here. And oh, okay. Well, you know what? Let's just do an example here. So this is, let's grab a fire protection this time. Why not? So what I've done, usually, I don't actually have it set up for this one yet, but that's easier yet because then we can just make it fresh here. So I'm going to open up that sheet. And let's assume that the placement on this sheet is exactly what we want. So we have this view. It's showing on this left-hand centered side, and we've got our fire protection node up here. So what I'll usually do is I'll use a detail line. As Sandra was saying before, those hotkeys are a blessing and very helpful towards fast workflow. Definitely consider them if you haven't already. So what I'll then do is I'll literally just take it from the corner of my sheet, assuming that that is going to be a constant steady point, and kind of treat that as a 0, 0. And I found that I think past like Revit, let's say 16 or 17, in addition to being able to grab the edge of the view itself, you can actually grab into the view. So you can either grab your grid line if you think that's going to be more consistent, or the corner of your view, your choice, your preference, or why not both? So I'm just going to grab, let's say, the corner, this grid line over here, make sure I'm grabbing the intersection, and oops, grab that point. And I'm also going to, for good even, I'm going to come right over here, and I'm going to say, you know what, it doesn't truly connect to it, but this is going to give me a better chance to adjust my view title and have consistent placement. So as I place it on the next view, I'll know, okay, I'm just going to drag this to that same point more or less. That might not be as perfectly positioned, but it'll at least be very close. Or if the first time you place it on your sheet, if you keep the size of the scope box consistent, the view title will snap kind of towards the bottom of it consistently. But once you start to manipulate it, it can start to have more trouble. So I'll say, okay, well, this here is going to be my line of sorts. And maybe I'll also add in a quick little text to say, let's do corner. And let's do grid A1. And let's do view title. Oops. So I'm just going to select all that. I'm going to group it here. And I'm going to set the origin point just for a little added security. Let me call this and I'm going to use this little XY crosshair to help give it an origin point. And now I can then take this same group and place it onto another like-minded sheet. So I'm going to say, let's copy that. Let's find another level 1 sector 3. Here we go. That's another example. And ideally, when I paste this to the same place, we should see those red lines I put in line up to the same spot on the views. So what I've done is I'll usually make my first view, get it lined up the way I like it, generate the rest of it, and then paste that group to all views. So then that way, as I kind of go through view by view, I can, the first time somebody works in the view, they can help align it. They can delete out that group except for one spot that will save it just to help do it all over again as necessary and then come back. Question on the way back? So the question is how often I find myself using manufacturer models compared to my generic ones. I would say for my company, since we're primarily design, I would say 75% of the time we're using our own generic one just for simplicity and for kind of baseline visibility needs. But for more detailed projects, we will go in. I know that GreenHeck has pretty good libraries. I know that, what was the fan coil units I was using recently? I know there's several manufacturers out there that have good libraries to them. But I've often used the manufacturer's website themselves, figuring that will have the best parameters set up for it and the most calibration. That being said, I have used other spots. I've used Revit City to help bring in components as needed, especially if they're more on the peculiar side or more expanded use than just MEP fittings or accessories or equipment. So I'd say any of it is viable. It's what you end up using a lot. I know ATS Spec has an excellent website for everything plumbing related. So it kind of depends on your field. It depends on if you're design or construction. I would say for construction, it's probably imperative to hit the LOD standard you might need. For design, there's a bit more leeway. It comes down to your preferences and what you have set up. I have a lot of things calibrated in my generic families that hooks up well to other features. So I kind of know what to expect. So there's a little benefit in that. But having parameters that are family based, so that way, let me see if I can grab it quick. If I go to manage, if I go to project parameters, so you can define within here. I have, where'd it go? So I have a couple IDs. So to be able to better distinguish between, say, mechanical equipment that's on the air side or on the plumbing side, on the piping side, I created special parameters that help decipher them and then split them in my view templates, which I totally recommend to everyone. Those parameters will hit any mechanical equipment category family that comes in. So regardless of if I'm using my own family or some third party's one, as soon as it enters my program, it will get the same filter capability. So that's a nice way around if there's some trade-offs, if there's some issues with, well, will it have this parameter I need? You can set it up this way and know that you will get that workability. Does that answer your question well enough? Great. I'm sorry, can you repeat that? The detail. Why do not embed the lines in the detail? Oh, that's right.
Yeah, I did the exact same thing, and I tried both ways. Right? You open up the title block, drop the lines in there, save and reload it, and it shows up on every sheet whether you want it or not. And then you can reverse that and make sure you get them. What I usually do is paste a whole bunch of selected views, and I get all of the views at that height, and then try to remember to complete them as I go, and invariably miss one or two. And then I'm amazed that nobody else looks at it and wonders why there's this red line. Right? So, you're making a good point. There is a more universal way of doing it. By having the that group that they're done with the group in the project, if I don't merge it out, if you add sheets later on, I've got that group that I can drop in, I can right click that on one off. So, like many things, it's a trade-off of what's fastest now and what's fastest as a life.
Very good point. You're absolutely right. I think that having the group is nice because then it's more calibrated for each project by project nature. You can put them directly in the sheet as like an invisible line, so that way you know it's not going to print, but you can tether to it. The problem with that might be if somebody's working on the sheet and they're suddenly confused why it's snapping to something they don't see after the alignment is done. But all of those are great solutions, and it's whatever your preference might be. Sure. Guide. Oh, that's true. To be honest, I almost forgot about those. It's been a while since last I used them. What I found is that they'll work beautifully on in the initial setup, and then after that, it can be a great hassle when dealing with the sheet later. And I find that they start to be a little difficult viewing at a certain point. But it's almost like a forgotten aspect to sheets that I hadn't thought about for so long that I've almost neglected them. But that's a good point. That's something that should be brought back. Right. That's also so. No. That's a good point. That the size of the grid can be adjusted. Just to repeat for anybody else who might still be online, that the size of the grid can be adjusted so that way it's not overwhelming after the fact, but then used for good placement in initial stages. This is the model itself. So this here, we've got the projects. I've got my full project browser and organization on the side. And then the sheets are all defined here using whatever title block you might need. What I'll usually do, excuse me, is I'll link in the architectural model. I try not to work directly within theirs because, especially if it's updating, at the very baseline, the architectural model will definitely be a link. Once the project exceeds, I don't have a square footage to give, but at a certain point, once it gets big enough, I do start to recommend splitting out your systems, because from an ideal perspective, Revit runs pretty quick even when it gets a little slower. It's nice to be able to work on everything, and for a single user, it's great to have it all in one spot. You never need to worry about it. Once you've got a team working on it, and there's greater fear of, just in case the electrical engineer ends up touching the diffuser and moving it, there becomes more risk of somebody touching somebody else's, or if there's an error in one file, or for one user and then it hits everybody else. I'd say that's when it starts good to split it up. So a recent healthcare project we were working on, where every single trade is going to be involved, I actually split the model into 3. So I've got an electrical, fire alarm, and nurse call file. I've got one for plumbing and fire protection and med gas, and then I've got one more for mechanical ductwork and piping. And that's just to help keep some separation, and then all of those will load in the other files to it. So I've seen, from the small standpoint, it's a single architectural and structural file loaded into your all of MEP. And then at the biggest, for Eastside Access, for instance, which I've worked on, we literally, for the master file for that, had, I want to say, at least 100 Revit links in there, just because the project was so massive. So it can scale up. It still works very well. It just gets a little slower each time you do. Again, for that master file I was just referring to, I think it took a solid half an hour to load up in the morning. But the ones we were in, it was beautiful. Oh, one more question. Sure. Yes. Oh, okay. You know what? That's, of all things I pre-prepared, that is by far the most important, actually. So let's see where I actually put that. Definitely in here. Oh, go figure. Okay. Let's see what I got. We're going to let's go to grab a mechanical. Let's grab this over here. I'm still getting accustomed to Revit 2019 and the new view maneuverability. So I'm going to open this up, and let me also open up an electrical RCP for comparison. Come on. Come on. Excuse it running a little slow. So I'll try and describe it by word while I'm getting everything loaded up. So what we're dealing with is, I'm going to clarify what I was referring to with the ceiling grids. So within, hello, what's showing up? Oh, there it is. Okay. For a moment, I thought my background did not load all the way. But there it is. So here we can see, let me zoom in so it's easier. Here's our grid line. So this here, while we have the ceiling showing up, this is actually a floor plan view with a modified view range that has the cut plane going above the ceiling so it can be seen, since the cut plane is what's actively showing us the architectural background. And again, this is a slight abuse to kind of leverage having our hidden lines work for us. So I know this is a stretch. If anyone discovers a more effective way, please let me know. It's my dying question of the day. Because part of the issue with this is that my space tag is kind of freaking out right now. It doesn't know what it's referring to. So that's the biggest downside currently to this method. Also, if you've got one ceiling that's at a different level than another, your RCP is not going to like that. So what we're dealing with here, and close hidden does not work for this type thing. Lovely. Wait, I can do, not what I want. Okay, this tile. And let me get to this 3D view. And selection box. Here we go. So the ceiling grid is built into the family itself. And hide these. Almost there. And zoom in. Do have some color. And let's expand this just a little bit. Make this easier to see. There we go. So typically what we'll see is our ceiling grid. So this is from the architectural link. The way that it's constructed, so if I'm going to grab tab, I'm going to grab the ceiling and I'll edit its type, that when they build it out and we go into structure, what I've sometimes seen recently, and it's beautiful practice, I totally understand architecturally, they'll ensure that the acoustic tile finish is purely on the underside of the ceiling. But the top might not have that same item. So I believe when I first got this model, the bottom 1 inch was acoustical tile and the top 1 1/4 inch was a solid material. So I was only seeing, so currently we can see on the underside of the ceiling, let me hide this so we're not getting that in the way. Almost there. my C drive and everything. On the underside, we'd have that ceiling grid, and it would display for us the full pattern. But on the top, it would be totally solid, and that was no good. It was causing some issues. So what I had found is I could manipulate it. And actually, I have the model group right here. This is what I had actually used, where rather than having to open up the architectural model and change it every time, because why would they keep my deranged idea of how to do ceiling plans? I created an extra group using their ceiling. I made sure that the acoustic grid went all the way through. Oops, I want to modify that instead of this. And then I have the grid also on the top surface of the ceiling. So that's actually what we're seeing here. So it is possible, and it's a risk. I could move this grid here. Oh, because probably it's locked in the group. I could move the top grid out of alignment with the bottom. And I'd love for Revit to be able to have that grid line show through no matter what. I think it is something that was developed a bit more in the Revit 2019 version. I think it actually upgrades the project for demonstration purposes. So it might not be fully essential here. It's something I do want to vet out more completely. But I think it's getting better, but for previous versions, it was a large issue that it wasn't displaying quite right. As compared to the RCP views, which view it no problem because the architects had set up the file specifically so the RCP would look proper. So having that worked just fine. Unfortunately, yeah. So I'd have to make sure that that group still matched the new update. That or another solution I found was to export their RCP file, their RCP view to a CAD, and then use that as a background. Again, no perfect solutions at this exact moment that I've seen. And same thing that I was trying to allude to before, but forgetting the exact naming of it. If I go to Revit links, and I go to my host view, and I can define under here by custom, and I can set the linked view to something specific. But because I'm ultimately trying to get it to work for a plan view, I can't link the RCP because it doesn't let me. It only will let me link other floor plans. So that was going to be my solution for a while, and then I realized that it was going to block me from that. So that's something that I think we're getting there. Solutions are imminent, but for right now, CAD's going to work. Actually, I think if I go back to an earlier slide I was on, this guy here. So this here actually looks very nice. This was actually created because the backgrounds were behaving very poorly, and solution when it came down to the wire we need to produce really quick. These are actually two views stacked on top of each other. Again, not something I like to do because there's the risk if one view gets moved and now nothing lines up anymore. There's going to be some problems, but for this particular instance, based on project need, it actually came out remarkably clean. All right, thanks so much. If let me know, I'll pass something on to you. Going on.